You need to take care of the drums.
Well, I know I like to play music with jazz musicians, but what is a jazz musician is the implicit question, right?
Jazz is many things. It's a story, it's a historical narrative, but it's also a sound.
I don't consider myself anything because I think if an artist considers himself or herself something, then you're already limited. When I'm inspired, it doesn't depend on what I think at all. It depends on I don't know what, but my intellect doesn't really play any part. It becomes very instinctive. If at that moment I think, oh, I'm a jazz musician, then I'm not going to play anything. I'm going to just get paralyzed and leave the stage and go home, So I think as an artist, I try to be as fresh as possible, and I think I leave to critics, this wonderful game of is this person a jazz musician or not.
There is a sense in which in the continent, geography and landscape has always been a consideration in the sonic, right? So of course the idea of playing in a concert hall or a theater is very new in that sense. If you look at the traditions of talking drums, they were always built according to how we wanted the sound to travel, right? So it would consider, open landscapes. It would consider it was mountainous. So in a sense, people would use the low drums to communicate in particular geographies, whereas they would use high pitch, they would travel further in other types of geographies. I think in many ways, if you think about the South African kind of saxophone sound, there is a sense in which it projects this kind of distance. Just if you think about Winston Mankunku, if you think about Brazil Nawana, and all of those people. But even the singing, if you think about Miriam Makeba, there is always this kind of projecting a distance, which sometimes I don't quite get in other parts of the world.
What's really unfortunate in the post-nation and the post-colonial right now is that musics like Kuwaiti Bahri music are geopolitically located in a very small piece of land in the Northeast Peninsula. But the music itself tells a story of migration, of sustained engagements with other civilizations, and I'm talking about the subcontinent and the Swahili coast and Arabistan, which we call part of Persia today, Iran, and that the actual genre of Kuwaiti Bahri music really defines an origin story because it was the result of these sustained engagements that were influenced by nature, by the monsoon winds. So if shipmasters traveled from, let's say, Mombasa to Calicut, they'd have to wait until the winds changed, which would take a whole season in order to return back to go up the Malabar coast, the Persian coast, and back to Arabia and to Basra for the whole triangle to kind of be complete, that whole circular path. So over hundreds of years, there was this circulation, and so certainly this was based on commerce and the need for survival. And in Kuwait, even fresh water had to be imported. But of course, there were cultural, I wouldn't even say exchanges, but kind of like infusions, like it's really difficult to know where one, in some cases, begins and the other ends. The first set that we're playing with Jean Michel and Jean certainly features some Bahri music, that it's also really focused on the rhythms of the Swahili coast, which are much different than what we'll be playing in the second set with Nduduzo and Elise, of course. Lots playing in both sets, which are far more influenced by the subcontinent and Persia. So by its very nature, this music defines an origin story. And similarly, I think it's very difficult to give jazz an origin story. I think anytime you try to say this is, you pinpoint something in jazz, you're excluding.
This morning I was swimming in the sea and I thought, what's the name of the sea I'm swimming in? But then I thought, suddenly I thought, it doesn't matter. It's a sea. So, you have the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean. It's a very small planet in the middle of the cosmos. We are like a grain of sand, right? In the middle of immense universe, as we know now, that we have scientific knowledge of it. And we are still trying to divide that grain of sand into like microscopic little territories and then torture ourselves to death thinking, oh, but I'm from there, I play jazz, but is it American? But so jazz is there. Well, we need like a very powerful microscope, and somebody from some other galaxy coming here would be, what are they doing?
Repertoire in Africa is paired with context. So you almost can't perform any song outside of context, right? We come from the ancestors that played rain songs. So you can't play a rain song if you don't want it to rain, right? So intention is so embedded in the song.
There are always historical narratives about the self and about who you are, whether it's your family, your tribe, your nation, your hemisphere, your continent, and so on. And so one of the things that I did for one of my classes called Music and Identity in Trade was I took a DNA test, because I had been taught all kinds of stories about my family about bloodline purity. And I got that only 50% of my DNA was from Minnesota. And the other 50% started actually at the tip of South Africa and went up the whole entire eastern coast of the continent and up to the Levant and to Persia. And there's something like 15% Turkish. And I asked my mom, she said, oh, actually, my grandmother was Turkish. And then there's 20% Persian. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, my dad's like, oh yeah, my grandmother was a white redheaded Persian lady, and everybody made fun of your grandfather because he had a white mom. And then actually, your grandmother comes from the Swahili coast originally, and that's where Eritrea comes in. And people were mad when your grandfather married her because he was white and she was black, and that was a big deal. And all of a sudden, all these narratives and all these stories that I had been like, oh, I come from Najd, and it's like it doesn't. Even when you try to take ownership of these spaces, there's always a crack. There's always something that breaks the narrative. And so part of my blood tells a history of slavery. Some of it tells a part of the history of maybe being the slave owner also. So there's all these contradictions in these conversations, and how they're voiced in music is one way I think about jazz and how I think about it. It's not always pretty, but it's necessary.
I think you have to preserve the mystery. You know, if you dig into the mystery, then it's gonna damage something. You have to let it. You have to keep being. I think you have to be very innocent to play good music. You have to be very innocent. Like sometimes I say that I want to lower my mental age as low as possible. 1 year old is perfect.
Tenor speaks about two tenors. I think they were married. Both really beautiful authors that have spoken about rituals in Southern Africa, particularly, and so they end up with this term called liminality. And I think this is the way to describe the unconscious. So liminality, in a sense of ritual, would mean the place of in-betweenness. There's a belief that there's a transition between being a boy and being a man in a lot of the Bantu societies. And part of what happens is before you get into this transition, you are extracted off this familiar surrounding, right? So you're taken to the wilderness, for example, right? And so there is a moment in this ritual where you are no longer a boy, but you're not yet a man as well. And then maybe, I think this is, for me, a way to kind of theorize this kind of unconscious in the music. That there are these moments where I take the theme that is known, right? And I explore it so much to push to the unknown. And something else kicks in. The meditative music would always lead to a space that is unknown. And that maybe that is why, like, a lot of music in the continent, like in an indigenous sense, would really loop like a kind of two-bar thing. Because improvisation, there's a different relationship to improvisation. Whereas in jazz, it's kind of set to happen after 32 bars in a traditional sense, right? So improvisation is really set, that's the moment of improvisation. And it lasts for 32 bars, otherwise we won't book you for another gig because you missed the form. So you have to end within a 32 bar structure. So but also it puts another kind of responsibility that after the 32 bar had A, you really have to solo at the beginning of the new 32 bar. Now, how does that differ in terms of ritual music? Ritual music leads to improvisation via a concept of embellishment. So embellishment is really about like how a melody develops until new melodies emerge, until we forget what the first melody was. So my system is like from the known to the unknown to the new knowing. So the unknown is the improvisation. The new knowing is that you have to be different if you traveled elsewhere and came back.